So this is a game called Depression Quest that was at the centre of some scandal, but there's plenty of stuff out there about the scandal itself, so I'm not really going to talk about that. I'm going to avoid it like the plague, but it may have influenced my opinion of the game. So at the start you could see there was a quote from David Foster Wallace, who is a fantastic author and wrote Infinite Jest, which is a deeply, darkly hilarious book, and I recommend reading it. Now, this Depression Quest is a piece of interactive fiction. The gameplay elements are limited, and mainly the text is expository and written in the second person, so the descriptions are they're kind of described at you rather than you. It's like you're told what to feel, and in my experience, this is not particularly effective. I mean, most writers write in either the first or the third or the fourth person. Sometimes the fourth person, you know, like we, us, them, and so on. And the reason for that is because when you adopt the second person, you end up having to tell people what they're feeling, which obviously isn't particularly effective, because phenomenologically no one tells us what to feel. We feel something, and it's kind of at odds with our experience, and so I feel it kind of feels a little bit forced. The intent of the game is to make you understand what it is like to be depressed and how difficult it is to seek help in that scenario. And in that regard, I do think the game has some it is a laudable effort, and I do think that it's a well-intentioned game, and that in some way meets its goals of raising awareness about depression. Like, there are nice little details in there about, you know, consequences to do with adopting a cat, which can be effective, and the difficulties of describing how it is to be depressed to other people. And I mean, personally, I have suffered from depression. I'm currently on medication for depression, although I'm not currently seeing a therapist, which may or may not be a good idea. But anyway, that's beside the point. But it does, I mean, certain aspects of it do ring true, but one of the things that I feel is a problem is, as you can see, when you choose, there are these kind of like red line through the options that you would normally choose if you weren't depressed. Like, socializing and having a good time just isn't an option for someone who's depressed. Now, to me, it seems like it would have been much more potent to actually just leave those options out entirely. And the fact that they're there and crossed out kind of just, it feels forced, and it doesn't really reinforce the fact that these options don't even occur to us. It'd be much more powerful just to leave them out. I mean, people can see, like, if they just saw the options that they were there, they could see that I think it would provide much more debilitating experience. Like, you're not even aware of the more positive options that you could choose because you are depressed. But people who aren't depressed are aware of those options, so that would feel, I think, more uncomfortable than simply crossing out the options. With regard to the text and the description itself, it's not particularly it's not bad writing, and it's not good writing. It's kind of mediocre. A lot of the descriptions are forced, or, you know, like the analogies, the metaphors. It's a bit light, and I think that, you know, if you want to, you know, feel what it's like to be depressed, much better to read David Foster Wallace, who's far wiser and more interesting on the human condition. Not to say that it's not worth producing things like this. Like, I think this is as I say, it's a good idea. Like, and I think it could have been executed better. But essentially, I'm glad that someone's trying to make games like this. And it makes me wonder, you know, what's the state of mind of the person making this game? But, you know, in video games journalism, in journalism in general, that, like, there's this view that the author like the whole death of the author, so we can't really consider the author's intent because it's not really relevant. And I actually think that in the context of the experience of the game and not knowing anything about the author of the game, it's kind of irrelevant what her intentions are and what her own feelings were. So, like, in my view, this is a game which is struggling to portray a situation, a set of emotions, like that's deeply troubling and deeply disquieting and deeply like debilitating, and it kind of achieves that. But I mean, the music like is a bit too I don't know. It's the same piano track. Like there's only one bit where you go to the party that the sound actually changes, which I think was quite effective. But I wish there was more of that, more immersion. The reason that games are so effective as a medium for portraying things is because games are much more designed, much more easy to design as a medium of showing rather than telling, which is like the first rule of creativity, of like creating works of fiction or video games or films, is that you don't, you know, heap dialogue with exposition. You don't, you rely on methods in the world. So, for example, if this had been described from a first-person perspective or a third-person perspective, like where we would have to infer the emotions of a character, that again could be disquieting. Or if we simply, if we played this in a 3D world, in like an actual computer game, like where you like go through these dialogue trees with real people, and then you don't have the option to do what you want, that would again reinforce the debilitation. Like, and you could you know, you do that in different ways, like by reducing the number of interactable objects in the world over time or in different situations. Like there's many ways that you could convey. Now, so it's limited by its medium, but it's also limited by its approach. And I feel like it doesn't really end either. Like, I mean, it says that depression doesn't really end, which to me feels just like a cop-out. Like, it has no ending, and it that's kind of explained away, rather than it doesn't feel like an ending. Like, it just feels unfinished. And maybe I feel that more could have been done to resolve the narrative. Now, like, even if it was just like one of the something at the end, like, you know, they have in those in films, like, and so and so on. Later on, you know, they joined the NASA and became an astronaut, and they lived happily ever after. That kind of thing. Like, I know that's not how things work in reality, and there are other ways of doing this. Of course, this is just a random suggestion that I've thought of off the top of my head now. But like, the reason that we tell stories is to create, you know, satisfying endings in our lives that clearly don't exist without that level of interpretation. If you've ever read Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, it goes through this trope of like, all my life is just a series of things that happen, and you know, there's no meaning to what I do. Stories are kind of nonsense because they give us an ending. But that novel has an ending. Like, it you know, it ends with you being in this cafe listening to this music, and you have this existential experience of what that's like, and there's a summation of the sentiments of the novel, and like, this doesn't have that. It doesn't have that finished quality that even a book like Nausea, which is covering a lot of the same themes. I mean, it's no doubt that Kenton is in some way depressed, in my mind, or, you know, going through some kind of existential crisis. Clearly he is. Like, the whole book is about anxiety and nausea and the inability to find meaning in the world. And I just question, like, the narrative of this novel, because it seems to me to be written from a very ideological perspective, and the mainstream perspective of depression and depression as a medical condition. I mean, it's like, it also, I mean, maybe that's not fair because it doesn't. You know, it's true that medication in context of therapy does actually improve, have the best outcomes for people with depression. But like, it's not simply a thinking cognitive disorder. It's in my mind, it's an existential crisis, a crisis of the spirit. And okay, maybe this is my own ideology, maybe this is my own thoughts and feelings, but to reduce depression to a series of sequential series of events in which the character is unable to act, kind of undermines the view that depression is not just the inability to act in situations, not just the inability to choose positive outcomes, but the lack of a reason to choose positive outcomes. Like, in my own experience, depression isn't about it isn't just about the outcomes of depression, like the symptoms of depression, but the very core of depression is a reasonlessness, an absurdity, and I didn't really get that from this, and it didn't really ring true with me for that reason. Like, it was just, I feel bad, and like, okay, maybe, you know, I feel useless, maybe I'm not doing well in my life, and maybe that's what some people feel in depression. I don't want to you know, I don't want to devalue those experiences, but there are, like, this I mean, it does say that it doesn't speak for all people with depression, so that's fair enough, but yeah, I would just stress that in my own experience, it would have, I feel like this novel would have been better served if the character had more philosophical insight into their own depression, had more of a, because, like, those are the characters that are interesting, like the ones that see their own condition and still can't rise above it, because that is the nature of depression. You can understand it analytically, you can understand it phenomenologically, but you can't overcome it just because you understand it. That's not how it works. And the character in this piece of interactive fiction doesn't really understand depression, and that's part of the reason why she's unable to seek help. But even when you do understand depression and you do know how it works, there's still this inability to believe that it's possible that it would work, like that you can get help. And so for all that, that's kind of like my takeaway feeling from this. It's a commendable effort, and I like the fact that someone's trying to make a game like this, but I feel that it could have been better done. The writing could have been of a higher quality. The gameplay mechanics could have been more polished, little as they were. Like, it feels like it was like the sound could have been more diverse, and the graphics could have been more, like, the images used could have been more evocative and provocative, and the character in the novel could have been more self-aware, because self-aware characters, like the ones that Dostoevsky writes about, who are literally battling their own conscience, are a much stronger interest from an intellectual perspective, from a critique of depression. It's kind of like, if you want to understand depression, you need to understand it through the eyes of those who see it themselves and are still unable to escape it. And that, to me, is what sums up depression. It's an inability, even in the face of reason and logic, to overcome your inability to feel good about things. I think that's pretty much where I'm going to end it. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been a deconstructable review ramble over some, gameplay of Depression Quest. And thank you. Comment in the comments. Tell me what you think, and I look forward to hearing from you. All right, thank you. Bye bye.